groups, including Your Desk University, BIM Thoughts, and now my very own YouTube channel, Dynamo BIM. 5 user groups along the East Coast have come together to bring you the BIM XT network. The network is run by a board of advisors to help guide the meetings. Our hope is to provide a live forum, essentially to where you guys can share and connect on processes and tools related to building modeling. As a side note, these meetings are recorded and will be available online for future review. On that note, we do have a LinkedIn group. If you are not part of it, please join us now. We will have all of our previous recordings as well as any additional information, including, any information or resources that the presenters share with us. We'll go ahead and post right up on there. So make sure you join our LinkedIn group. You can, of course, find it through my page, or we will post it within the chat. I think Amanda's probably on that already. Today, we are really lucky to have a kind of back to basics meeting, if you will, all about tips and tricks. We have Kate Morrical Towne, a digital design manager at Silman. She's going to be talking about Minute to Win It, Revit edition. So some things that you can do really quickly within Revit to increase your productivity, etc. We then have Jacob Small with Autodesk. He's going to be talking about Dynamo, things you missed along the way, and I didn't update that. It's actually 8-bit, right? He's going to talk all about it. It's going to be really cool. You guys have probably seen my background by now. I got the Mario going on. He's going to add to all that cool stuff. So we also have our very own Nick Sykes with CADD Micro. As you very well may know, he's an advisor on the board. He's going to be talking about some really cool visual tips that we can do inside of Revit for renderings or whatever it might be. So I'm really interested to see that. From last month, we picked a survey participant. Thank you for all of you who participated in the survey. But this month, it looks like Angie, you won a $25 gift card. So congratulations. Someone at CADD Micro will reach out to you. And please, at the end of the meeting, make sure you fill out the survey. We will share that link in the chat, so make sure you pay attention there. With that being said, the chat is what makes this meeting so awesome. Communicating with all of you. In some of the last meetings, our chat has been super active, and that's so awesome to see. We really want this to be a forum for you guys to be able to share and network and really just communicate, either here or on LinkedIn or whatever it might be. So make sure you keep that up. Pay attention to the chat, ask your questions for our presenters. I'll make sure I'm paying attention to that and throwing in our questions to whatever presenter is active at the time. So make sure you join that. Without further ado, we will jump over to Kate. How you doing, Kate?
I'm good. Are we going to do the polls first, or
we can absolutely start with the polls?
See who we're talking to.
See who we've
got enough people.
Absolutely. It looks like we have about 65 people. So first off, where are you calling from? And we also really love it if you do not see where you are represented on the list, especially if you're calling outside of the US. We would love to let you know in the chat, to let us know in the chat where you're calling from.
A few night owls here.
Yeah, seriously. I got some people from Europe, and I will share these. Looks like we got 80%. So I'll go ahead and share these results. Of course, most of us are from Northeast. We're represented here in the Northeast. Understandable, but love seeing it, right? We have some Asia, some Europe. So please let us know where you guys are calling from elsewhere outside of the US. Looks like we have some Long Island, some Maryland. So that's awesome to see. Like I said, I'm from Virginia. I think Jacob, you're up in Boston. Have Nick and Kate also in Virginia. So love to see that. All right, next poll. We'll stop sharing this. We will ask, what discipline are you calling from? Or are you with? Who do you represent? And if you do not see it here, please let us know. I feel like every time we have a meeting, we get a new representation to add to the list, which is so cool. So who is that other? I want to know. Let us know in the chat. Looks like most of us have voted. Oh, Rick DeFilippi. Well, I forget. What's your food service? Okay, we might have to add food service in there then. We'll share the results here. So 38% of us are architecture. We got a lot of MEP, some structure. Love that.
Yeah.
Got some owners. That's awesome. Okay, few more polls because we love these. What is your experience with Revit? And I'm just going to ask this one before I jump over to Jacob's because he's going to talk about Dynamo. So, oh, we got some very confident people here. That's awesome. I love to see that. And that poll at 80% and share the results. So that's pretty awesome to see. We got some intermediate experts, some very low beginner representation. So you got some pros in the house, Kate. That's who you're talking to.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Awesome.
I love it.
All right, so I will stop sharing those results and we'll go over to you, Kate.
All right, so I will share the slideshow. Just confirm that everybody can see the screen.
Sure can.
All right, so my name is Kate Towne. I'm with Silman. We are structural engineers, and I started this Revit session because there are so much in Revit that you can spend days learning, and it's all worthwhile and valuable. But sometimes you just want the stuff that goes, faster. So we're going to cover, I got 20 minutes. We got 20 tips that we're going to do here. And I know that like 40% of you said that you are experts, and that is great. I am still willing to bet that I can show you something today that you haven't seen before. And even if I'm wrong about that, I guarantee you there is somebody in your office who needs some of these tips. So
something you forgot, right?
Yeah, or it's like I knew that was possible, but I just hadn't seen it in a while. So I've done this a version of this presentation several times now, and there's always been at least something new for everybody. So let's kick it off. All right, we're going to start with an oldie but a goodie in the category of where did it go? There are something like 34 reasons why something might not be visible in a view. And if you're talking about a detail, a section, or a call out, it might be this little parameter, hide at scales coarser than. I personally love this setting, especially when you have dependent views. If you have floor plans at a smaller scale and you don't want to show your sections on the larger scale. But if you set that value too small, they might disappear in a place where you're expecting them to be. So put that in your toolbox of Revit mysteries. Next up is another favorite for really long detailed titles. This is how to put a line return in your title on sheet parameter. Note that this is different from view title. That is a different, or view name. That's a different parameter entirely. No line returns there. But if you select the title on sheet in the properties palette, again, it doesn't work in the drawing window, but in title on sheet, if you put your cursor in the title and use Control Enter, that'll give you a line return, and you can break your title whenever you want. No more using spaces to force it onto the second line. Quit doing that. Use the Control Enter for title on sheet. Sticking with the view category right now, if you've ever wondered where on earth a particular section or detail is cut, right-click. This will be a theme throughout the presentation. When in doubt, right-click. In the right-click menu, you'll find referring views, and it will show you every place where that detail is cut. Now, if something's hidden by a filter or hidden by category, it won't be seen here. So it is possible that you will get referring view cannot be found. It's a little bit trickier. Sorry about that, but hopefully it shows up somewhere and you'll be able to go grab it.
On the previous tip, actually, we have a question as to whether the Control plus Enter works in a schedule view.
Oh, guess what? It does. That Control Enter works in schedules as well. Yes, absolutely love it. And before I leave this one, don't neglect the open view at the bottom of this dialog. You don't have to go to it in the project browser. You can just go to it straight from this dialog. Now, the flip side of this, you've got a sheet view, or you have a view, and you're wondering, where is this on a sheet? Project browsers get really long, especially with depending on what discipline it is, there can be a lot to scroll through. So scroll less, right-click more. If you right-click on a view name, you'll be able to open the sheet that it's on. If that view is grayed out, it means it's not on a sheet yet. Oh, this is one of my super favorite hidden tips that I got from Brian Mackey. If you right-click on the lock icon for a dimension, like on the lock, not just to the left, not just to the right, it has to be right on the lock, you get the option to show related objects. So if you've ever wondered what exactly was being referenced by that dimension, if I delete this wall, is that dimension going to go away or not? It'll tell you. Obviously, it'll show you at least 2 if you have for any dimension, but if you have a whole string, it'll run through them all. All right, let's keep moving. This is another one of my favorites. These are all my favorites, so please don't count how many times I say favorite. But select tag host, because even though if you move an object, the tag will go with it, which is a great thing about tags, but you can still move the tag all by itself. And sometimes they end up floating and you're like, where did this come from? I would like to make sure that its object still has a tag. So grab the tag, select host, and it'll change your selection to the object being tagged. All right, okay, this one, I put it in here because it's super popular. You have to promise me, Scout's honor, you will not use this for evil, okay? Don't do it, and if you do it, don't tell them I told you. So sometimes we need to put in a 0-inch dimension, like you've got 2 things right next to each other. This shows up all the time in structure for rebar. 2 things are overlaid, and we need to dimension a 0. You can't just type in 0 inches because Revit is smarter. They are watching out for us, and they're going to say, I'm not going to let you put in a different number in your dimension. But if you right-click again, see, told you my right-click theme. If you right-click in the replace with text and go down to a Unicode control character, pick your favorite one from the list on the right. Once you put that in there, it acts as a text character, an invisible text character, and then you can put in a number after it. But again, please promise me that you're not going to do this to, override 5'11" into 6 feet, because that's like, people will hunt you down. They will figure that out and they will find you, and it won't be good. But there are specific use cases when this is valuable. Just be careful. I
will say that was like 6 disclaimers.
It was, but it's necessary because the whole point of Revit is that it's real.
We're getting some some conflict in the chat there, but that
okay.
She's covered herself with disclaimers.
Yeah, just don't like I'd say. And this, I tell you, I'm structural, right? Structuralist comes up a lot. You get 2 things that are vertical, and you need to indicate that they're sideways. So we can discuss it later when I'm when my presentation turn is over. All right, this is a little PSA to my architecture friends here on the call. There's a little checkbox in a wall property that is super important for your structural friends, and that is the structural checkbox. If you check this box, the wall will show up when the view discipline is set to structural. If you do not check the box, the wall will not show up in a structural view. Full stop, no way around it. That's how it is. It's hard-coded, built in. Most of the time it works great. That said, if you want me to know that there's an important wall here, please check the structural box. Might be nice if I can see where you think the core walls are, and even better, don't check these boxes on things like toilet partitions. I don't want to see those. Those aren't structural. If you use this box for good. Another one here for my structural friends. So we've talked about column footings. And usually when we talk about a column footing and somebody says, I need you to drop that footing 2 feet, you grab the footing, you change the footing elevation, and you end up with this, which is not exactly the desired condition. Columns don't float. The reverse situation, you need to move the footing up 2 feet. So you grab the footing, you move it up 2 feet. And it's like, no, just kidding. I'm going to put it back at the bottom of the column because I know footings go under columns. Well, how do you get around that? There are 2 ways. One is you could change the elevation of the column, change the bottom elevation of the column, and then the footing will follow it, whether it goes up or down. Or you can use a new feature. I think this is 2019 that this came out in, where you can now attach the column to the footing. Move the footing, column goes with it, vice versa. Very handy if you think things are going to change. This tip I kind of call the who knew tip. So we've seen these little arrows that you can flip the direction of a wall, flip which face is interior versus exterior, but how do you know which face is which? Turns out those little arrows always appear on the exterior side of the wall. So even if your wall is aligned at center line and you'd like to know, which side is the exterior, look for the arrows. So by looking at this, I can actually tell, I don't even need to see this wall's properties. I know that its justification is set to interior face because the walls are on the other side. All right, another public service announcement that I learned at a conference several years ago. If you are moving a grid and you would like the columns and beams that are associated with that grid to move along with it, you must move it more than 7 inches. I do not know why 7 inches is the magic number, but 6 3/4 inches is bad, 7 inches is good. Let's say you needed to move it an inch to the left. What I do is I move it a foot to the left and 11 inches back to the right, and that way everything goes with it. We've had way too many abandoned beams and columns before we discovered this tip. I took it back to the office and everybody was just thrilled that we no longer have to chase down orphaned objects. Let's talk about revisions real quick. So revision schedules are great, and there's more coming in 2022, but I'm not going to get into that right now. But sometimes my project manager will come to me and say, I need you to hide all the revisions, all the clouds for this revision. I don't want to see it on the sheets. I don't want to see it on the title block. And what are your options? Like, you could delete the revision and print and undo real fast, but that feels very dangerous. You could use Bluebeam to try to edit the title block, paste over the thing in the title block, but that's also then you post-production, and that's not great either. So what you can do instead is to kind of blank out all the revision properties. So set the numbering to none to blank that out, blank out the date, blank out the description, uncheck the checkbox, and then if you need to, set the cloud and tag to none, so they're all gone. And if you need to, you can use the issued to and issued by fields as kind of placeholders. So I have the date in there as TBD and the description is future. It's something that's happening later. We know it will be issued, but it's not ready yet. And now all your clouds are still in the project. All your tags are still in the project. It's still in the proper place in the schedule. You just don't see it on the title block. Once we figured that out, it made our lives a lot easier because we don't have to hack the model itself or the resulting PDFs. Back to views here for a second and the project browser. So if you need to move a sheet from a view from one sheet to the other, before I learned this tip, I would right-click on the view, remove from sheet, go find it in the project browser, drag it back onto the sheet, and it takes a while. Instead, just look for it in the project browser under the sheet, grab it, and drop it onto the new sheet title. Revit will open up the new sheet and let you place the view exactly where you want it. You might have to reset the viewport type because it will go back to the default one that Revit uses, but it's still way faster than actually deleting and re-adding them to the sheets.
Question on the previous
tip.
Yep. What if you have a new type of title block that doesn't have any revision information on it?
A new type of title block with no revision information, like no schedule?
Right.
Probably. Yeah, I think the only way around that is to, I see what you're saying, to switch them out. That could work if you wanted to blank out all your revisions.
Right,
but
that's true.
Yeah, usually what happens is we've issued revision number 80 and 81. We're ready to issue 81, but we have some things that we know we're going to be part of issue 82. They're just not ready yet. So we need to see all the previous things.
And you would still need to go in there and manipulate the clouding and tagging stuff to be.
Well, at least you can at least you can set those to none. So those at least will, that's right. One global change. But then you'd have to remember which title blocks you had, and I suppose there's a schedule or a script that you could probably use to flip them back and forth.
Or but depending on Explorer, if you have that, that would be a wonderful reason to use that.
Yeah,
but yeah,
depending on your circumstances,
that would be tough.
Yep. Okay, let's see. Moving right along here. All right, another relatively new feature, which is dealing with linked models. A lot of times we like to unload our links so that they don't slow our models down. But so I actually, this is on me. I got in trouble when I first started using Revit because I kept unloading things to make it faster. And my colleagues were like, what are you doing? I was using that because every time you sync to Central, it would unload it for everybody. But I think again, back in 2019, they started this unload for me. So it will unload on your local copy, and somebody else, if they're working on the model at the same time, can still have the model loaded. So the best of both worlds for linked models. All right. Another one of the tips that I actually got from Dana at a Revit DC meeting several years back. You ever open up a model and you want to know who on earth did that? Where did that come from? What are they doing? Now, maybe you want to know why they did it because it's really cool and you need to find out, you know, how they did it so they could show you too. But unfortunately, most of the time it's more like, let's find out who needs new training. So if you end up in either of those situations, turn on your work sharing display, pick your favorite category. It doesn't matter whether you choose checkout status, owners, whatever, doesn't matter. But as soon as you have something color coded, you can then hover over it and it will show you who made it, who owns it now, who updated it last. So all of these are mine, I think, because at the time I had been the last one to create this central file. But there might be somebody else's name in some of yours. All right, so for our last few tips here, I almost had this presentation ready and then they launched Revit 2022 last week. So I had to go through and pick some of my new favorites, because again, I have all the favorites. And it was surprisingly difficult to narrow it down to just 4 or 5 here. But I'm going to tell you, there are enough here that as a consultant, I have to use whatever model, whatever Revit version you are using. And I'm going to be like campaigning for upgrades, you know, before September, please, because there's some good stuff in here. All right, first up, new feature in Revit 2022, you can filter schedule by family or by type. Oh, finally, I keep forgetting that you can't do this and going to look for it, and now I won't have to forget again. Number 17, tags. We mentioned some tag things before, but you can now have multi-leader tags. So if you, like the wall tag there, down there on the screen, it's tagging all 3 walls. 1 tag, 3 leaders. It knows that all the walls are different. And one thing on the left of the screen that is not getting quite as much love, but I know is really exciting for those of us who've been trying to do this for a while, you can now rotate tags. So horizontal and vertical are no longer your only options. I've had like rebar tags that want to be at 45 degrees and really frustrated engineers. So I'm really looking forward to this. All right, and I can hear you. I'm predicting that somewhere in the chat, somebody's going to say, what if you tag a wall with like one of those is wall 1 and the other 2 are wall 2, then what? Well, it's going to show you varies, and even that is improved because now there's no more blanks. If you have multiple values, either in a selection, in a schedule, in a tag, you will now get the technique or the text that says varies. And even better, you can edit that yourself. Per project only, but you can choose your own varies text. This has been something that's been like just, it might be almost dangerous to have these blanks, you know, is blank blank or is blank multiple values? You know, take your pick. Almost any of these it feels like are worth upgrading on their own. So, but we're not done yet. We're not even close to done because we now have PDF export. And I will say I've learned that this is no longer in the print dialog. This is an export, similar to things like DWF or IFC. And you might say, what's the big deal? I'm printing to PDF all the time as it is. Well, sure you are, but you can now name your PDFs based on parameters in your project. And then my favorite, again, favorites, all the favorites. See there on the right, use sheet size. We have an extensive typical detail library that uses about 4 or 5 different title blocks. And now I'm looking forward to the ability to export PDFs of all those details, and they will choose the sheet size based on the title block name. I haven't checked to see if they'll use this orientation, but I bet it will, because they covered all the boxes. So when you get a chance, look into this PDF export. All right, one more. Again, super exciting. I'm seeing some nods already. Phase parameters in filters. How many times have you tried, if you're working with existing buildings, say, I want to filter all the elements that were created in this phase? Nope, Revit's like, I can't do that. No, I can't do that. Why would I want to do that? So now you can. Select by phase created, select by phase demolished, add your favorite color filters. Just go crazy with it. Really looking forward to this. And we're almost done, but I couldn't stop with just 5. So I only have 20 minutes for 20 tips, but I had to put this in here that we can now directly link in Rhino files into our Revit. Let's combine that with the Rhino inside. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to see where that goes. We can do tapered walls. So if you have a battered retaining wall, you can taper that now. For my structural people, hide non-core wall layers. Show me only the structural core. Yes, please. We talked about revisions. You can now have your own custom sequences. We had levels added in 3D views a while ago. Now we get grids. And there's still like 25 more that I didn't get to cover. So that's my plug. On behalf of your consultants, check out Revit 2022. All right, I think I talked too long, but we're done. Did we lose Dana? He coming back?
We may have, but I think if I'm recalling correct, I'm next up on the list. So I guess I can just jump right in. Someone could just give me a thumbs up for when you can see my screen. I will not be as active in the chat, but I'll keep my eye on things. I do have a whopping 49 slides that I'm going to put in front of you guys over the next 18 minutes. I timed myself right before this, so lots coming here. So hi, everybody. This is Dynamo Tips in 8 bits. So let's start off by pixelating things a little bit. Actually, I don't like the look of that. Maybe it's a bit too far. But let's get going all the same. So I don't want to alarm anyone, but the language around Dynamo is easy or simple. And the reality is sometimes it really isn't, right? So we sort of speak the marketing speak, but it can be a little bit complex. So it's certainly easier than the alternative of a full-blown add-in sort of written for every single application out there using C, right? That's a lot of rework, but it's not easy like that button from the major office supplies retailer that we all know, right? That classic easy button. There is going to be a lot of struggles, particularly early on. That doesn't mean you're going to wind up seeing nothing but this sort of outcome, right? The tips I'm going to give you today will provide you with some really useful information and tools to ensure that you can be successful throughout your larger sort of adoption and journey into the land of Dynamo. So let's get some housekeeping stuff out of the way. My name is Jacob Small. I work at Autodesk Boston office as a designated support specialist, which means I help customers who have enterprise business agreements avoid many of the negative pitfalls that come up in the design process, particularly around our software, but it's not necessarily limited to that. I help people out with anything within the larger design process. I do have to show this big old wall of text. I promise it's the only slide you're going to see from me today that looks like this. It's just a bunch of sort of legal speak that can be broken down a little bit more effectively than something along the lines of this. Shooting star falling, maybe a plane, Superman. Let's not buy just yet. So in plain English, don't make any purchasing decisions based on any coming product features that I might make mention to or things that I talk about development working on right now. You want to buy your software based on the capabilities that it has today. This is a quick look at how things are broken down. As I mentioned at the start, I've got a lot to cover, so we're just going to jump right into it, but you can use that to navigate if you go back and watch the recording. So starting right off the bat with some graph building tips. Much like many of our 8-bit adventures, it can really sort of help to have a map as you go. So what I recommend, always start to your process by writing out the steps, right? This ensures that you have some sort of thought in terms of where you want to go next. What are the parts of the process that you're going to have to get all the way through, right? You're going to be able to keep an eye on not just where you are, but also where you want to be that way. Now, your maps don't have to be super literal. They don't have to be a total sort of diagram of all those individual parts and pieces. It can just be sort of a simple list. I've helped a lot of people on the Dynamo forums by just saying, here's the list of the steps they're going to have to do. And 15 minutes later, they're like, yep, that worked. Checkbox for the solution, right? So keep that in mind as you go. Next tip, when building graphs, always start with a minimal data set. All right. What I mean by that, our 8-bit adventurers, you didn't sort of get to pick from any possible character in the game. There was some limits, and that allowed things to sort of run faster because we didn't have to build all the sprites for every possible action, right? Same thing with Dynamo. You want to start by building a small data set, something like a handful of rooms instead of every room in your mega project, right? And then you want to plan also on having a list of items, not just a single one. This will prevent lacing or Python looping issues from breaking as you start to scale things up. The list should also be complex enough to ensure that you've got some sort of list processing, but simple enough to be reviewable by a human. 3 to 15 items, I think, is a good sort of list length, 15 being the maximum list that you can fit in a data preview, which you can see over there on the right side of the screen there. Next up, much like our 8-bit adventures, you should plan on having to iterate several times as you go. You're going to have to come back to problems and work them out later. So frequent save as is a big part of software development. Plan on releasing things in stages. Semantic version really helps. You can go to sembar.org to get some information there. Upkeep on all your graphs is also going to be ongoing, right? So you want to try to sort of avoid accumulating too much technical debt, but accumulation of that technical debt is going to be just a given. It's going to happen. Learning how to deal with that's an entire separate hour-long course in and of itself, probably even longer than that. But this is an example of how I've built up one of my graphs sort of in stages. Note that we started with 0.01 and worked our way up to the latest and greatest 2.1.0. Also note that little failures log right there. Again, separate session. We could talk about this for a couple hours probably, of just saying every time it fails, how can I log that out, write that out somewhere where I can quickly understand what caused that failure to allow you to sort of build up better, more stable content over time. Next up, like some of our 8-bit games of skill, it helps to look at things from multiple perspectives and think through not just the starting state, but the end state as well. So remember back to that map. You know where you are, but the map knows some of the steps that you're going to have to take in order and the end state that you want to be. Sometimes you're going to want to build your graph backwards. That is, start at that end state and find out what node comes before that, as opposed to starting where I am now and building our way up. So our typical graphs, we read them, we think left to right, right? I started by putting an integer slider, then I put a number, then I put a list create. No, for this graph, I actually built this backwards, right? I knew I wanted to build a line through all those points. Let's create some points. Hey, how do I create a list of points as opposed to an integer one? I need a list. The X value is going to be what changes. All right, and then work our way back from there. Really handy tip from Dynamo 2.10 and on, which is in Revit 2022 and Civil 3D now. You can go ahead and Alt plus click to get an autocomplete to basically limit out the nodes that will be selectable there. So moving right along, now let's look at some ways to get around some of the problems that often are going to arise. So much like our 8-bit adventures, it helps to remember what every member on the team can do. Towards that end, knowing the data types that you have available is really, really important. Each data type has its own limitations. For example, you can't divide the word zebra by the word potato. It just doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. The object type node will let you know what your data is. Learn to sort of refer to that as you sort of build your way out. That's actually how I learned Dynamo for Civil 3D. I don't know Civil 3D at all, but this is how the object type node works. You can see I've created some random thing in that middle node right there, and then we wire that into an object.type node that returns a string that says autodesk.designscript.geometry.point. That point is the key bit there, and if I go back to my library and search for point, there is an actual category that has everything related to points, and now I can sort of pull that content through. Great point, Nick. The autocomplete does need to be turned on in order for you to be able to do that. That's done up in the settings. Great catch. Next up, just like on our 8-bit highways, staying left usually means you're going to be moving a little bit faster. Simply put, geometry that is more abstract and simpler will process faster, right? This is an image from the Dynamo Primer that's really, really helpful to refer to. Many times more of my most almost all, I would say, of my successful generative design work relies heavily on staying as far left as possible, right? If you're working right off the bat with a mesh and we're always going to be processing that mesh, your graph is going to be super, super slow. But if you've broken everything down into vectors, that's going to be faster. If you can't get all the way to vectors, try to stop at points or curves. Working with larger, more complex pieces is going to be slower. That's just the nature of reality. Up next in problem avoidance, just like in our 8-bit puzzles, as complexity goes up, the skill to find that solution will as well. Towards that end, remember your training as a designer, right? Breaking down the problem into sort of manageable abstract chunks is really going to help. Simplify anytime you can. Sometimes smaller, more meaningful bites are really, really good than sort of trying to build up a larger graph. You can always build that larger graph from those smaller, meaningful chunks as you go. One other sort of example here, right? I showed this piece before. The way this graph actually built up, I started first by making this portion of the graph. That was the entirety of the graph. All it did was just make the rafters, right? A couple of weeks later, somebody asked me a question, could we add it so it automatically generates the purlins as well instead of just the rafters? And sure enough, I added a new section to the graph. Some reorganization later, I said, you know what, while I'm here, I might as well make my columns too. Put that together. And then one day I said, you know, what the heck, let's add a brace that ties the column into the rafter as well. All of that can now be automated, but each one of those individual steps was able to be leveraged in a project environment to save us time without having to automate the entire process. So that was really huge. Also, like the hardware driving our 8-bit adventures, things aren't always going to work out as we'd like, right? We're going to have some problems with loading and stuff like that. So because of that, it really helps to keep some warnings in mind. Try and plan for situations where you know things are going to break, right? What if we selected a toilet instead of a door? Is it going to be able to renumber stuff based on the to and from room? Probably not, but you could write your graph to solve for that, right? Also important, many people don't know this, but function.apply can be used to suppress most, if not all, warnings. Now, this is a total double-edged sword. So disclaimer all over this. Don't just do this all over the place because it can create some problems, right? So you can see here, I've got two graphs up on screen. On the left, I just created a point by coordinates where my X values are the number 1, the word 2, the number 3, and the number 4. Obviously, I can't make a point from a word. It's not a number, so it doesn't know where to put that. And so you see, I don't have that second point at point 2, right? I get a warning on the point by coordinates. I get a warning on the geometry color by geometry color. Okay, this warning will sort of process out, and we know typical design Dynamo troubleshooting, go for the earliest warning, look at the data type that's coming in there. If you wanted to just suppress that so it never happened for whatever reason, you can use the function.apply. So I've built a function here. We can tell this node's in a function state because it's sort of the lighter gray. I've combined that with another function that we see down here. And the way functions work, it's going to take the result of whatever would be created by there and plug it into the next piece. So these pieces are going to run in sequence, right? Combine that into one function compose, pass that off to function apply, and I feed the number 1, the word 2, the number 3, and the number 4. And I don't get that point at 2, but I also don't get any warnings, right? Again, double-edged sword, because it's not going to say, warning, your graph may not have processed correctly, or whatever the error you might see through Dynamo Player would be. However, because it's not going to say that, we're not going to know that we might want to go back and very carefully double check all those results. All right, documentation is our next section here, and it's a really underutilized skill in Dynamo. So much like our 8-bit adventurers who use notes to figure out what to do, documentation should guide you for when things eventually go wrong. Right? All final graphs should be grouped, and nodes should, in terms of chunks of nodes, and those groups should describe what those nodes are doing. Keep your documentation standard handy. Have one if you don't have one, build one. This will help you sort of ID very quickly where your inputs are, where the nodes that are just calculations, the nodes that have Revit interactions, and most importantly, the nodes that record out the results. The Morrical view extension from John Pearson from Parallax team is a huge help on the documentation front. It is the one package that it's the first thing I go for even before generative design, to get Morrical on that system when I roll out Dynamo. Now, a good graph should look like this. You can see I've grouped all those nodes. It's plain English telling me exactly what's happening here for each of those parts and pieces. I've also added some additional notes that tell me kind of what is going on at individual parts and pieces. You can see them there at the 1 and 2 piece. And we, again, also want to make sure any custom nodes that we use there are documented in terms of what package they came from and what version the package was in use. Orchestra is also great for documentation as well. Great point, Thomas. Next piece, annotation of our code. Annotating your code is absolutely an underutilized sort of part of the process in the Dynamo environment, right? People are just sharing Python all over the place, and users get that and they're like, oh, what does import CLR actually do? I don't think I need it. I'll just delete it. And people wind up not actually understanding what is happening, and they're not getting as much out of it as they could be otherwise. So definitely take the time to annotate your code. Leaving keywords that people can Google later on, or even links to external documentation, is also a really great practice. This is extra important in AEC tech because the people who are going to be poking around in your code base don't necessarily know how to code, right? So the more your code's sort of written to have that robust error handling, they might think, the stuff that's here, this might not be good. And you can see modifications to Python that actually make your graph put bad data back into your Revit model. So this is an example of how I annotate my code. I probably go overboard, but you can see every individual line is totally spelled out in terms of what's actually happening. I'll even comment out lines where like an API call that kind of got me most of the way, but this might be useful if you wanted to go a different direction with it. You can just quickly read through those comments and just remove the comment on that code and get the node to perform differently. Also, I put big disclaimers in the middle of my code that say, hey, looking this bit over, there might be a better way to process this, and you want to take advantage of that anytime you can. Also, much like our 8-bit adventures, having a known set of items can sort of make it easier for you to understand how to go about solving a given problem, right? So maintaining that standard in terms of all of your content will help ensure you can process automation very quickly and make it easier to tackle that problem. The slightest change in stuff can really throw things off. This includes documentation in terms of how you documented your graphs, as well as stuff like as simple as project parameters, right? So if we look here, this is an actual sample from a project. I deleted a whole bunch of stuff in order to get this, but I had received a project the other day where I had all of these parameters in there. One of them is a type parameter. It's hard-coded inside Revit. The others were all instance parameters. They were all slightly different ways of saying fire rating. How would you go about automating this? Which one of the parameters actually wants to take all that data? How do I go about moving stuff from all those other parameters into the one piece? It's a total pain, right? In order to standardize things, you want to make sure that you're standardizing things at a higher level. And anytime you're going to use content from outside of your standard office, go back and vet those two pieces, and that will make your automation routines so much easier. Also, much like our 8 adventurers, we want to utilize every tool that's in the inventory, and Dynamo users should do the same. Custom nodes, packages being locally published or publicly published up to the package manager, design script, and Python can all add new degrees of functionality that Dynamo can sort of allow you to really scale some stuff up. So knowing the strengths and weaknesses of each is really important. I will post a PDF of this page in particular, but if you wanted to grab a screenshot, now would be a good time to do so. These are links to the Dynamo primer that cover custom nodes, packages, design script, and Python as just kind of a high-level overview. And you can go through the exercises there and really understand how they all work. Please don't publish packages to the package manager that are just sample, though. That's not doing anybody any favors. All right, last section, personal growth. Plan on growing into a larger skill set. Much like our 8-bit adventurers started small but grew to be heroes, we want to kind of sort of keep stuff down to a minimum whenever possible. You're not going to be able to solve all the things right away. So the reality is starting small and building up is really the way to tackle stuff, right? If you think about sort of the problems, content, and even sort of the design decisions, in terms of how you approach the process differently, you're going to find that you're going to be a more successful designer. One thing also to remember is Dynamo's not going to be the end of your journey, right? So if right now you're doing stuff in AutoCAD or in Revit or even with Pencil, where you're doing the traditional design process where you make and record decisions, and you want to someday get into generative design where you're describing goals and constraints, Dynamo is kind of the bridge from the old way of doing things into sort of that new way of doing things. Even stuff like, not just option generation or design optimization through generative design, but also things like machine learning. Next up, much like our 8-bit adventures, you're going to evolve. And Dynamo, your work in Dynamo is too, right? So keep an eye out for sort of the repetitive stuff that you're going to want to automate, sort of informing you when you'd want to dive into Dynamo, right? Looking at ways that data can sort of drive that decision-making process, or when redundant processes could be simplified. All of that content is also going to inform the work that you do in Dynamo, right? You're going to be iterating over the way you do stuff and getting into new, perhaps more complex, perhaps simpler from the user perspective as well. Next up, sometimes the joy in the 8-bit adventure is not so much in the using, but more in the creating, right? So Dynamo is really, really useful when you're making the content, less so when you're grabbing stuff, right? Our industry in terms of building design is very fragmented already, and that's not going to change anytime soon. Why would you expect a graph that a user on the other side of the world made working on a different project type that was posted in 2017 is going to perfectly solve your problem, right? It probably isn't. Instead, you want to take that content, refer to it, modify it, make it fit your needs, and then push it out, right? So another piece here is don't limit yourself just to the Revit side of things, right? Dynamo Sandbox is a huge tool, right? And towards that end, Python 3 support has actually been in Dynamo for 9 months now, right? That's a long chunk of time. You could have already started looking at sort of leveraging the stuff that big tech companies use, like machine learning, data processing, and computer vision, by just implementing Python libraries that are already out there into your workflow through that. Last but not least, one of my favorite parts in the old 8-bit days was leaving a lasting mark in there. So I remember going to the video store, renting the game, getting the high score, putting my initials in, and then challenging my friend to go rent the game next week and seeing if they could beat me, right? The Dynamo community is the easiest way to get involved with that kind of content, right? The more you put in there, the more you're going to get out of it as well. Note, if you need help, be sure to provide sort of the content that's needed to reproduce the issue as well. Don't just say, I can't get this to run. Could you write a graph that'll do this for me? Start with provide that small data set, right? Provide your map if you've got one, and the graph as it currently exists. And that'll make it much easier for the experts to help you. More or less everything you need to become a super skilled Dynamo expert is there or referenced from there. So make use of that. The community is a huge part of what Dynamo is and a great resource for everybody. So a couple links. Again, I'm going to get a PDF over to the BIMXT team so that you guys can refer back to these, but another great point you might want to take a screenshot of. I will post it somewhere else as well if we can't get that out onto the BIMXT network. Also, check out our Customer Success Learning Hub at customersuccess.autodesk.com. Access to all sorts of great articles, product updates, tips, tricks, and other content. Again, customersuccess.autodesk.com. Last but not least, I have to say thanks to the makers of the great games that I referenced in my imagery today. I had a blast playing these as a kid and really enjoyed sort of looking at what Dynamo could do in terms of reading that content out. So I hope you guys really enjoyed this as well. Really enjoy getting to present to you guys. Thanks for having me, and feel free to reach out if you do have any other questions that we don't have time to cover here.
Okay. All right, Jacob, breathe.
Yeah, I talk fast, but you're going to give me the rest of my money.
I do what I can.
We did lose Dana. She apparently is having internet issues. There was a question while you were going on, and this is one that comes up all the time with Dynamo. I don't know if you want to weigh in on it, but getting other users in your office on the right package version.
So yeah, let's talk about this real quick. There's a couple different ways you can do this. The first one, distribute the content the same way you distribute your CAD blocks, right? Refer people to the server, right? And you can actually pull many packages directly off your CAD standards kind of drive. That's not necessarily the best practice though. It'll work for the most part, but there can be some issues there. What I recommend instead, sort of the best practice, is to have that S drive set up, and that is going to be where you put the standards. But then as part of the user login script, just have the contents of that S drive copied onto the local disk. And then everybody who logs into the network is going to have access to that content, right? So you can just take care of that through your GPL, through kind of a robocopy method. And that will solve the problem. Now, doesn't help for people outside the network. Let's say you need to, I'm working with Dana and I need to share a graph with her. For those pieces, that's where it's really, really important that we document those custom nodes that we use. Again, Morrical View extension has a handy copy nodes to clipboard function, or copy packages to clipboard function. And you can just paste that in on the Dynamo screen, zoom to that section that has all the sort of required dependencies. And then when Dana opens up the graph, she'll see, oh, these are the things I have to have. That has been further simplified within Dynamo in 2.6 or 5. There's the Dependency Manager, where when you open the graph, it's going to check if you have those packages. And if you don't, there's a handy link you can click in the Dependency Manager and it'll download it. So,
and that actually was in an earlier version as a preview. I forget what it used to be called. So it is in...
It's in 2020, or 2020.
Yes.
Not yet in 2019 or 2018.
Correct.
But if you've upgraded all the way in 2020, you should be good to get that.
Right. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to thank you, and we're going to switch over to me, and I'm going to cover as much as I can of my presentation in the 10 minutes left. We are going to be respectful of everyone's time and end on time today, as we always do. I'm going to do my best to watch both the time and my presentation. So here goes. All right, so I'm gonna cover some simple visuals. This is kind of back to basics. This is not gonna be in a full-on render. I'm gonna skip all this stuff about me due to time. So I'm not going to necessarily get into rendering. This is stuff that I've aimed at all disciplines. So the first thing is view settings, detail level. Depending on the category your view is set to, meaning the discipline, the detail level can affect what you see. Color schemes, pay attention to the location, whether it's in the foreground or background. If it's in the background, things that are 3D models will cover it up. So just pay attention to what you're doing. Visibility and graphics overrides, model display patterns, line weights, view filters, which I'm going to make another plug for 2022 now. You can finally use a filter with phasing, which is huge because now you can actually target specific categories based on a specific phase and get them to look different. And then use view templates. That's all I need to say about that. Use them. They make your life easier. Within view settings and graphic display options, there's a few things now. I think every year for the last like 3 years, they've made minor changes to this dialogue. So depending on which version you're in, depending on what it'll look like, but all of them have these same options. Model display style, pay attention to that, as depending on what the style is, depends on how materials are affected by that. So we have wireframe. Wireframe just looks at object styles and everything becomes transparent. Hidden line is the objects get the material graphics from the materials. Shaded and consistent colors. Realistic uses the appearance properties. Smooth lines will, with anti-aliasing, will actually like smooth things out. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes it doesn't look great. It's kind of a try it and see what happens. Shadows can be really helpful for making a view have depth, just like something called depth queuing. And then pay attention to your lighting in regards to shadows. So I'm just going to step through here. I've got some examples. So hidden line, everything's transparent, but you do get, and this is the part that's a little confusing, the materials patterns, surface patterns do show up if they're model. If they're model patterns, they do show up even in hidden line. Hidden line's great for seeing through the model and trying to see what's going on when you have to troubleshoot something. But it can also be very confusing. I'm sorry, that was a wireframe. Hidden line is great for most of your views. That's what 90% of your views probably are. Shaded applies shading to all sides based off of your lighting. Consistent color keeps all the materials the same color regardless of where the light source might be. And then you have realistic, where you're pulling from the appearance properties of it. So back to materials, which, yes, I said I wasn't going to talk about rendering, but materials have way more to do than just render. The graphics tab is probably one of the biggest important features that I like to point out. We have the color, the amount of transparency, how much can you see through these solid objects is controlled by the material. What patterns do you want? Surface and cut patterns. For those that have been unfortunately stuck in the past, you can do foreground and background. The one catch is background patterns have to be drafting. They always are drafting patterns. So here's some other tips and tricks. Depth queuing, a little bit of an example. This is not an exact science, okay? So leave it unlocked on your view template, but what you can do is you can futz with these settings and make the things further away and closer to your cut line of your elevation show up. Silhouette lines, you can add a thickness to the line weight around the edge of your model, and this will, should be, there we go. There's your first one that you're going to see pop. Also really good at kind of giving your elevation some depth. Yes, futz with the settings is the official terminology. You can use a background, normally it's none, but you can use a background also to give yourself some little bit more depth. View filters for visibility and graphics. Color coding systems is doesn't work through links, and it only works in plan views. But if you're using a filter to color code your systems to see structure or fire protection or all your different parts, filters work really well to color code everything. And like I said, now you can use phasing also, so you can get even further. And you have and/or filters. Like I said, I was running through this. So here are just a couple examples. This is a simple, just shaded view, just to give a idea of space. Axio, once again, very quick, very simple, just to give idea of space and how things are working. All right. So, all right. And that is as much as I've got time for. Let's see, did I miss any? Fuse with shadows on BIM 360, return a raster image. I'm going to take your word on that. I have not experienced that myself. I don't know if anybody else has experienced that. So,
if return means printing, anything other than hidden line has to print with raster processing. Is that right?
Yeah, that is true. That is true.
Yeah. So the large model viewer doesn't support texturing, basically. So as sort of vector processing, so it does have to convert it over to a raster format.
I see.
Oh, yeah, you're correct. Yes.
Yeah, it becomes sort of flat,
yeah.
a flat like JPEG.
Right.
So a lot of the added tools kind of go away.
Yeah.
So the limitation, they're pointing out the limitation on the raster images that you can't measure or select elements.
Correct. Yeah. As soon as you go, yes. And that's even off of, it goes with what Kate's saying. As soon as you go off of like hidden line, essentially, when you create a PDF or anything, it's forcing it to do raster processing, which is just a flat image, and you lose all the benefits of vector.
Although shaded images still, you can still have shaded views in BIM 360 and measure off of those. I guess it's just when you add shadows that you start to
Any tips when rendering to the cloud in Revit LT? I didn't think you could do that off the top of my head. Thought that.
I think you can through LT. I'm not really an LT user.
I know. That's why I'm like, I don't remember. There's certain things yeah.
But generally speaking, the stuff that makes a good local rendered image will mostly just be cranked up to 11 cloud rendering. So it's a matter of building up the materials correctly, stuff like that, rather than.
Yeah, it's when you're doing any real render, it's a balancing act between the materials, the lighting, and your camera setting. And you've got to balance all three of those to make it look right.
Yeah. It's basically the process. The cloud just becomes the final render, right? So you've got to go through and iterate over, like make the decision on how exposed you want it to be, make the decision on the amount of light you want to dump into the scene and the post-processing, and then send it to the cloud that way.
All right. Well, it is after 2, and I apologize for that. I meant to.
Nah, it's my fault, I think. I talk real fast sometimes, but there was just so much to say today.
That's okay. I just want to honor, respect everyone's time, and go ahead and say that we are going to end. If you want to stick on for some Q&A, that's fine. Amanda just put a link to the survey for this core, or for the event in the chat. We'd appreciate it if you fill that in, because we use that to figure out what the next meeting will include. We have not planned that yet, or at least not to my knowledge. And so you're welcome to stay on for any Q&A, or you can leave. The survey will be sent out after the meeting. We will post Jacob's PDFs to the group's LinkedIn page. If he sends it to either myself or Amanda or Dana, any of us will get it to the right people. Amanda just put a link into that LinkedIn group. If you could go there, follow us, you'll get information about like Jacob's PDFs, when the next meeting is, what the next meeting is going to cover. So I want to thank everybody for attending today. Dana will be back next month, I promise. Hopefully her internet will have worked out by then.